Have you ever had a single question change the course of your life? For Grace Ellison, a dedicated hospice secretary in Charleston, one unexpected encounter at a Rainy Harbor fundraiser did just that. Balancing the care of her ailing mother, the survival of her beloved hospice, and the weight of her own dreams. Grace never imagined a billionaire's quiet gaze could stir a whirlwind she wasn't prepared for. Cole Harrington, a man defined by success, power, and unspoken longing, enters her world not as a prince, but as a test of trust, courage, and integrity. Who really holds the power, the one with money, or the one with heart? Can love truly bridge worlds so different that one mistake could shatter everything, from whispered secrets to hidden letters, from ethical dilemmas to moments of undeniable connection? Grace and Cole navigate choices that will define their lives, the hospice, and the community that depends on them. Will Grace protect those she loves while opening her heart to something unexpected? And can Cole prove that true wealth lies in compassion, not in control? Stay with us as we uncover the story of trust, love, and courage that begins with one question and a single perfect moment. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single heartbeat of this unforgettable journey. Grace Ellison woke before the alarm. She always did. Sleep rarely lasted through the early hours, when her mind played its private game of what if. What if her mother's heart acted up today? What if the rent check bounced? What if the hospice lost its building for good? The questions never stopped, and she had learned to rise with them instead of fighting back. Her first thought that morning was not about herself. It was about her mother. In the small apartment on the third floor of a brick building, Grace moved quietly, so the old floorboards would not creak too much. She paused at her mother's door, listening for the steady rhythm of breath. Then she pushed it open with care. The room smelled faintly of lavender lotion, and the pill bottles lined up on the nightstand. Her mother stirred, opening her eyes. "Morning, Mom," Grace whispered, setting down a glass of water. She checked the pill organizer, counting twice. Her hands knew the routine by heart, yet she still looked at each label, each dosage, because mistakes were not an option. Her mother smiled weakly. "You worry too much. Not enough," Grace said softly, brushing a hand across her mother's thin hair. Breakfast was simple: oatmeal with a slice of peach, coffee for Grace, tea for her mother. They ate in silence, the way people do when words are too costly and the day is long ahead. Grace carried the dishes to the sink, rinsed them quickly, and slipped on her flats. The air outside was already heavy, even in early spring. Charleston mornings carried a sweetness from jasmine blooming along fences, but the humidity made every breath feel weighted. Grace walked briskly down the narrow street, clutching her bag against her side. She always carried a small notebook, where she wrote what she called her list of mercies. Small acts she hoped to manage that day: send flowers to Mrs. Carson in room 12, call the insurance office again, remind the volunteers about the new visiting hours. She believed in writing them down. It made the impossible feel ordered. At the hospice office, a cluster of emails awaited. She scanned the subject lines, her stomach tightening. Lease review update, urgent council meeting notes. She clicked the first one. The message was blunt. The city's redevelopment board was moving forward with plans for the harbor expansion. The Harbor Light Hospice Foundation, already on thin margins, might lose its lease within the year. Grace sat back, the hum of the air conditioner loud in her ears. She thought of the patients, the families, the faces she saw each day. Where would they go? The hospice was not perfect, but it was a place of dignity, a place where endings could be softened by care. She closed the laptop and rubbed her temples. Tonight's fundraiser had to succeed. It was not about extras, it was about survival. By late afternoon, Grace was carrying boxes of printed programs across the brick sidewalk to the Cypress Inn. The historic hotel stood with white columns and wide porches, its wood polished by centuries of use. Inside, the lobby gleamed. Polished floors reflected the golden light of chandeliers. Grace felt her flat squeak against marble, so different from the scuffed linoleum back at the hospice. She kept her head down, balancing the box, weaving through guests in tailored suits. She had a quick glance at her phone, checking the event timeline, when she collided with someone coming out of the elevator. The program scattered in every direction, papers fluttered like startled birds. Grace gasped, dropping to her knees. Oh no, 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 no. She reached for the sheets, her hands shaking. A pair of polished shoes stopped beside her. A man knelt, picking up the scattered pages. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. Grace looked up and felt her breath catch. The stranger was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair slightly tousled as though he had run a hand through it moments ago. His suit was finely cut, but he did not seem to notice the marble floor pressing against his knees. His eyes, gray with hints of blue, met hers, steady and calm. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Grace nodded quickly, embarrassed by her clumsiness. She gathered the papers, trying to smooth the edges. He held out a neat stack toward her. For a second, their hands brushed. She pulled back first, pressing the papers to her chest. "Thank you," she murmured. He smiled, a small curve that seemed almost private, then stood. Grace rose too, adjusting her bag, wanting to disappear before her cheeks betrayed her. As she turned, a card slipped from the top of the stack and landed near his shoe. He bent to pick it up. The card was embossed with gold lettering, Private Benefactor, Harbor Light Hospice. Grace reached for it, flustered. "That belongs to the guest list. Sorry." He handed it back with a nod, as if it were of no consequence. To Grace, it was only another detail in a long evening ahead. To him, it was a piece of himself, quietly revealed and then hidden again. She hurried toward the banquet hall, unaware of the truth that the man she had just bumped into was Cole Harrington, the billionaire whose company stood at the center of the harbor project, threatening her hospice. Later, back at her desk, Grace checked her inbox again. A new message blinked tomorrow. Harbor tour with Private Benefactor. Mandatory attendance. Her heart tightened. She closed the laptop slowly, the scent of jasmine still clinging to her memory of the day, mingling with a face she could not quite shake. When you live on the generosity of others, the most frightening thing is how one careless rumor can blow out a flame of hope. Grace carried that thought with her as she arranged the name tags on the registration table. Each tag represented someone who could help keep the hospice alive, or someone who might decide it wasn't worth saving. The Cypress Inn's ballroom had been polished until every glass sparkled, white tablecloths draped across round tables, silverware lined up in neat rows, waiting for hands that could afford to give. Grace checked each place setting, adjusting napkins with quick fingers. A faint coffee stain marked her sleeve, the result of rushing between the hospice office and this grand hall. She rubbed at it with the edge of a napkin, but the mark stayed. She sighed and moved on. Guests began to arrive, their voices a soft tide of greetings and laughter. Grace smiled, welcomed them, crossed off names. She had practiced her words to sound both grateful and steady. Behind her eyes, she held the weight of rent checks, medical supplies, and a mother's fragile breath. Across the room, Cole Harrington observed quietly. He wasn't seated at the head table, though he easily could have been. Instead, he stood near the back, content to watch the movements of the woman he had met earlier in the lobby. Grace moved with precision, bending to reassure a volunteer, guiding an elderly couple toward their seats, smoothing a child's hair while handing her a juice glass. Cole's gaze lingered when Grace leaned close to help a family fill out a small card. It was part of the evening's tradition, writing down a final wish for a loved one in hospice care. The father's hand shook as he tried to write. Grace steadied his wrist gently, murmuring encouragement. The child peered at the card, curious. Grace wrote the words with careful strokes, then placed the pen back in the father's hand so he could sign. She gave the family a smile that seemed to belong only to them. Cole felt a tug inside, one that surprised him. In boardrooms, he was decisive, sharp, never sentimental. Yet here, he watched a woman give dignity to strangers with nothing more than patience and presence. Grace caught his eye once. Her glance was quick, cautious, then gone. She noted the way he stood apart from the crowd, his posture calm, as if nothing in the room could unsettle him. She recognized wealth in his tailored suit and polished shoes, but also a restraint she couldn't quite place. She turned away, focusing again on her list. The evening rolled forward. Servers carried trays of shrimp and biscuits. Wine glasses clinked. Grace hurried to the kitchen to check counts, returned with extra programs tucked under her arm. She knelt to pick up a napkin someone dropped, her hair falling loose from its pin. She didn't notice Cole's eyes follow her small, efficient movements, the things most people overlooked, but that he found strangely grounding. During a pause in the speeches, Grace stepped aside to check her phone. A new message glowed, lease under review. Update soon. Her throat tightened. She thought of the patients whose rooms overlooked the harbor, the families who counted on the hospice. She slipped the phone back quickly, forcing a smile before returning to the tables. Near the dessert service, she overheard two men in dark suits discussing numbers. She caught a name that sent a chill through her Harrington maritime systems. They spoke of expansion, of contracts, of land values rising. Grace froze for a second, piecing it together, her hospice, her patients, her job, all balanced on those figures. She straightened, smoothing her dress, and carried a tray of programs to the next table. Cole had moved closer, near enough to notice the crease in her brow. She looked composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. He almost stepped forward, almost said something, but he held back. He wasn't ready for her to know who he was. Not yet. As the evening ended, Grace gathered the leftover cards, each filled with handwriting that trembled with love and fear. She placed them gently into a box marked Wishes, as if they were fragile glass. Her phone buzzed again. She read the subject line, Harbor Tour, Private Benefactor, Attendance Required. She closed her eyes briefly. Tomorrow, she would have to escort the mysterious supporter through the very docks tied to the hospice's fate. Her gaze swept the ballroom one last time. Guests laughed, servers cleared plates, music played, yet her thoughts circled back to the man with steady gray eyes who had picked up her papers earlier. She didn't know his name, she didn't know his ties. All she knew was that his presence lingered, like a shadow stretching across the roof of her life. The heaviest kind of weariness does not come from long hours or endless tasks. It comes from the quiet demand to believe you are still enough in a world that measures worth in profit margins. Grace felt the truth pressing down on her shoulders as she stepped out of her apartment, her shoes clicking against the cracked pavement. Her morning had begun with the same rituals, checking her mother's pulse, measuring the tiny pills into a paper cup, listening for the steadiness of breath before she left for work. Their apartment was small, tucked inside a block that smelled of fried food and damp brick. The window frames rattled when trucks rolled by on Meeting Street. Yet Grace had lined the sills with pots of mint and basil, believing that green life could soften even the hardest corners. On the other side of town, Cole Harrington rode the elevator to the top floor of a tower encased in glass and steel. His company's headquarters loomed over the harbor, sleek as a ship's prow, its mirrored windows catching the sun. Inside, the carpets muffled footsteps, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and power. Cole's assistant handed him a folder of reports numbers, contracts, expansion charts. He skimmed them quickly, but his mind caught on the faces he had seen at the fundraiser. For a moment, the memory of a woman kneeling to help a trembling hand sign a card intruded on the neat lines of profit and loss. Cole had been raised to read numbers, not emotions. His father had built ships with iron discipline. His mother had expected perfection. At dinner, the talk was always of achievements, never of dreams. Even now, at 45, Cole carried the shadow of those expectations. His success was measured in fleets and systems, not in the softness of how he treated people. Yet something in him longed to be seen as more than a name on a magazine cover. At the hospice that same morning, Grace greeted a new patient. The file read, Eve Harper. No family listed, only a P.O. box for correspondence. Age 68, Background Charleston native. Admitted for advanced illness. Grace carried the folder to the intake room, her fingers brushing the edges of the paper. She introduced herself gently, her voice the practiced calm of someone who had walked many through their last seasons. Eve Harper's eyes held a guarded look. Her hair, once dark, had silvered. She chose her words carefully, as if each one cost more energy than she could spare. Grace wrote notes in her neat script, documenting symptoms, preferences, requests. She promised privacy, dignity, and quiet. Later, as she reviewed the file, Grace noticed something odd. The patient's birthplace matched details she had heard once before in society, Page's connections to an old Charleston family, the Harringtons. She brushed the thought aside at first. Coincidences happened. Still, a seed of curiosity settled. That afternoon, while sorting through forms, Grace found an envelope tucked between medical notes. It was a draft of a letter, half finished, written in flowing cursive unlike the patient's shaky handwriting. The words spoke of regret, of wanting to mend what had been broken with a son. Yet the signature line was blank. Someone else had written it for her. The penmanship was elegant, the kind taught in private schools decades ago. Grace held the letter, her heart tightening. Who was this son? Why had the patient kept the draft but never mailed it? She slid it back into the folder, locking the drawer, but the question stayed with her. That evening, while she walked home, she stopped at a corner store for milk. On the magazine rack by the register, headlines blared. One caught her eye. Who is the mysterious woman seen at Harrington events? The article speculated about a new romantic interest for the billionaire. The photo showed a blurred figure in a hospice volunteer's uniform, leaning over a table at a charity night. Grace recognized herself instantly, though the angle made her features indistinct. Heat flushed her cheeks. She paid for the milk quickly and left, clutching the bag against her chest as if it could shield her from whispers. Back in the apartment, her mother noticed her silence. "Long day," she asked. Grace forced a smile. "Just tired?" She didn't mention the article. She didn't mention the letter. She didn't mention the way the world seemed to be folding threads together. Threads that might lead back to the man with calm gray eyes. Before bed, Grace opened her notebook, the one where she kept her list of mercies. At the bottom of the page, after all the tasks and reminders, she wrote, "Help Eve, write her letter." The words were simple, but her pen lingered over them. She wasn't sure yet if she had the right, but she knew she had the desire. The draft still waited in the file drawer at the hospice, unsent, unfinished, carrying the weight of a life's worth of silence. There are days when rain falls like a curtain, thick enough to blur the world outside, leaving only the sound of water to force us to hear our own hearts. Charleston had such a day, and Grace Ellison found herself walking under it. The fundraiser had ended, the tables were cleared, the lights dimmed, and the guests had gone back to their cars and quiet neighborhoods. Grace stayed behind to check details, to make sure no envelope was left unopened. By the time she stepped out, the clouds had broken loose. Sheets of rain swept across the harbor. The air smelled of salt and earth, the familiar perfume of the city after a storm. She pulled her jacket close, but the water soaked through quickly. The streets emptied, shutters rattled, shopkeepers turned their signs to closed. Charleston, lively just hours earlier, felt as if it had retreated behind locked doors. A figure waited near the hotel steps. Cole Harrington, his suit jacket damp at the shoulders, stood beneath the awning. When he saw her, he lifted his hand in a small wave. Grace hesitated. She could have walked past, claimed urgency, but something about his stillness kept her from leaving. They walked side by side under the shelter of the awning, watching the rain. For a while, neither spoke. Then Grace said softly, "At the hospice, what we offer isn't medicine alone. It's dignity. That's the part people don't always understand. In the last days, people don't ask for miracles. They ask to be seen, to be remembered as whole." Her voice trembled, but she didn't turn away. Cole listened. His eyes, gray with that steady light, did not waver. In them she saw no calculation, no judgment, only attention. For a man surrounded daily by profit and power, he seemed hungry for the simplicity of her words. "I think about that more than I admit," he said at last. His tone was lower, weighted, to be seen not for what you've built, but for who you are, to be looked at by eyes that want nothing. The rain beat harder, hammering against the stone steps. Grace hugged herself, chilled. Cole stepped closer, the distance narrowing until she felt the warmth of him even through the storm. The moment was quiet, but charged. Grace's breath quickened. Her thoughts raced toward the hospice rules, toward the careful lines she drew between work and life. Yet her heart betrayed her, pulsing with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Cole's hand rose, stopping short of her cheek. His voice was soft, almost uncertain. "May I?" The question was simple, yet it carried a weight that bent the air between them. Grace's chest tightened. No one had asked her like that, plain, vulnerable, without assumption. She gave the smallest nod. His lips touched hers, gentle, reverent, a request made tangible. It was not a kiss of conquest, but of permission. Grace's body stilled, then melted into the quiet contact. The rain fell, the world hushed. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but the warmth of his mouth, the steadiness of his hand. When they drew apart, Grace's breath trembled. She stepped back, the edge of the awning dripping onto her shoulder. Her heart surged with heat and fear at once. This was not supposed to happen. Not here, not now. She thought of her mother waiting in the apartment, of patients counting on her steadiness, of the hospice barely holding on. Cole's eyes searched hers, not demanding, only waiting. Grace pressed her lips together, then shook her head faintly. "I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The moment cracked like thunder. She turned away, pulling her jacket tight, stepping into the rain. Each drop felt like a reminder of boundaries, of lines she couldn't cross. By the time she reached her apartment, her phone buzzed. She peeled it from her damp bag, wiping the screen dry. The message was brief. Tomorrow harbor tour with private benefactor. Attendance confirmed. Grace sat on the edge of her bed, her hair dripping, her chest still trembling. She told herself she would focus on the hospice, on the tasks that mattered. But behind her closed eyes, the question lingered, not the kiss itself, but the way he had asked. Peace isn't expensive. It hides in the right cup of coffee and in someone willing to listen while you tell your story. Grace Ellison discovered that truth on mornings when the city stirred slowly, and she found herself meeting Cole in quiet corners. They never spoke of the kiss directly. Instead, their lives began to cross in small, ordinary ways. A paper cup passed across a counter. A pecan pastry wrapped in wax paper, the murmur of voices at the Saturday farmers market, where stalls brimmed with peaches, okra, and jars of honey. Grace liked to arrive early, before the streets filled. Cole would be there too, hat pulled low, as if anonymity could hide his height and bearing. They would walk side by side, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. Grace noticed how he lingered at booths selling local crafts, asking questions about the work, not to impress, but to understand. One morning, they sat on a bench with steaming cups. Grace cupped hers in both hands, the warmth seeping into her skin. "I used to think peace meant security," she said quietly. "Now it means keeping my mother comfortable, paying the rent on time, making sure the hospice doors stay open." Cole listened, his face thoughtful. "When I was young, I thought success meant building bigger ships, faster systems, outpacing everyone. But lately," he looked out across the street, where children chased each other around a fountain. "Lately, I wonder what else it could mean. What good is achievement if it doesn't outlast you in the right way?" Grace studied him. The words were not what she expected from a man whose name appeared in financial headlines. They carried a weight, as if he was confessing more to himself than to her. He changed the subject quickly, asking about her favorite foods, her first memory of Charleston summers. She laughed, remembering mosquito bites and iced tea too sweet to finish. The sound of her laugh surprised her, lighter than it had been in months. What Grace did not know was that Cole had begun directing quiet donations toward hospice programs. Equipment requests were approved more easily. Small grants arrived without fanfare. He used intermediaries, never attaching his name. He told himself it was not deception, only discretion, yet part of him longed for her to know. Rumors, however, are harder to hide. Whispers spread after the fundraiser. Volunteers mentioned seeing her with a tall man, someone who carried himself with authority. One afternoon, Grace overheard two nurses speculating in the hallway. She smiled tightly and walked past, but her stomach knotted. She reminded herself of boundaries. She reminded herself of her mother's fragile heart, of patience needing steadiness, not distraction. In public, she kept her distance. In private, she wrote lists in her notebook, mercies, tasks, hopes. She never wrote his name, but she thought of him anyway. The comfort of those mornings was shattered by an internal memo. Grace opened her inbox at the hospice office and froze. The subject line read, Property Rights Review, Harrington Maritime Systems. Her eyes moved over the words slowly, as if meaning might change with patience. The hospice building, with its peeling paint and sunlit windows, sat on land tied to Cole's company. Harrington held the option to purchase. Grace leaned back in her chair, her chest tight. She thought of his gentle questions, his quiet presence at the market, the way he listened when she spoke of dignity. Was it all shadowed by business? Had she let herself believe in something that could never be real? That night, she sat at her kitchen table with her notebook open. She wrote the day's mercies, refill prescriptions, call insurance, comfort Mrs. Lee's daughter. At the bottom, she pressed her pen harder than usual, carving the words into the page, trust, but verify. Her mother called from the bedroom, asking for tea. Grace closed the notebook, forcing a smile. She made the tea, added honey, carried it carefully. She kissed her mother's forehead before retreating to her own room. On the nightstand lay the cup Cole had bought her at the market, painted with small blue flowers. She traced the rim with her finger, torn between warmth and doubt. The city outside settled into silence, but Grace lay awake, her heart wrestling with questions she wasn't ready to voice. There are secrets that do not belong to us, yet the way we guard them or betray them defines who we are. Grace Ellison knew this truth as she sat beside Eve Harper in the hospice's quiet room, pen poised over paper. Eve's hands trembled too much to hold the pen for long. Her voice, though weak, carried a note of insistence. Write this for me. Please. Grace nodded. She had done this before, helped patients craft words they could no longer write themselves. She leaned closer, listening carefully. Eve dictated slowly, stopping often for breath. The words were heavy with years of regret. They spoke of distance from a son, of mistakes left to calcify, of longing for a reconciliation that seemed almost impossible. Grace wrote each word in her neat hand. She paused only to read back the sentences, making sure Eve agreed. When the draft was complete, Grace folded the paper and slid it into an envelope. Would you like me to mail it? She asked gently. Eve shook her head. Not yet. It needs an address first. Her eyes closed with fatigue, but the lines around them told Grace the weight of unfinished love was heavier than the illness itself. Later that week, Cole visited the hospice under the guise of a donor tour. He moved with ease, polite with staff, but his gaze always drifted toward Grace. When they stopped near Eve's room, he noticed the folder Grace held. He asked, carefully, "What do you keep for her?" Grace looked at him steadily. "Confidences," she said. Her tone carried no apology, only quiet resolve. Cole felt something shift inside him. He was accustomed to people pressing, probing, always eager for what could be gained. Grace's refusal was not defiance. It was integrity. He wanted to ask more, but he did not. Instead, he walked beside her through the corridors, watching the way she adjusted a blanket here, offered a smile there, as if each gesture mattered as much as the largest decisions in the world. Still, doubt grew in Grace's mind. The memo about Harrington Maritime's rights to the hospice property weighed on her. She had not confronted Cole, not yet. But suspicion lingered. Could the man who listened so carefully also be the one who threatened her hospice's very survival? The answer did not come. What did arrive was a storm she had not expected. One morning, Grace stepped into the hospice lobby and felt the weight of eyes on her. A volunteer handed her a folded newspaper. The front page carried a headline splashed in bold: "Hospice Secretary and Billionaire, too close for comfort." The photo made her stomach turn. It showed her in the rain outside the Cypress Inn, Cole's arm angled near her shoulder. The image was blurred, but cropped to suggest intimacy. Another frame showed them walking through the farmer's market, cups in hand. The caption twisted it: "Private meetings or professional misconduct." Grace's cheeks burned. She barely heard the volunteer's apologies. She walked quickly to her office, shut the door, and pressed her palms against the desk. Her chest tightened with anger, fear, shame all tangled. The director called her in before noon. His tone was careful, but the message clear. "Grace, we value your work, but boundaries must be respected. Donors and staff. It raises concerns. You must be more cautious." Grace nodded, though her throat burned with unspoken words. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that nothing improper had happened. Yet she also knew the hospice lived on reputation as much as funds. A whisper could close doors faster than a fact could open them. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table, the envelope from Eve Harper resting between her hands. The letter inside remained unsent. The name line blank, the address missing. Grace thought of Eve's weary eyes, of Cole's searching gaze, of the article's cruel suggestions. She could not control gossip. She could not undo suspicion, but she could guard this secret. She slid the envelope back into the locked drawer at the hospice, turning the key with deliberate calm. For now, the letter would wait. Its silence spoke louder than any headline. Honor is like glass. Once broken, even if pieced back together, the cracks will always show. Grace Ellison felt the truth as her name appeared beneath headlines she never asked for. The article spread fast. Whispers turned to conversations. Conversations into judgments. By Monday morning, the board of the hospice placed her on suspension. The word was administrative leave, but to Grace it sounded like exile. She packed her desk with steady hands, though inside her chest trembled. At home, her mother sensed the change immediately. Grace tried to hide it, but the older woman saw through her silence. Stress deepened her mother's fatigue, the color leaving her face. Grace brewed tea, adjusted pillows, spoke gently, yet guilt clawed at her. Her work was supposed to bring stability. Instead, her own reputation had unsettled the fragile balance of their lives. Meanwhile, Cole Harrington faced storms of his own. The city council summoned him for questioning. Cameras flashed as he entered chambers lined with microphones. Council members pressed about the harbor project, about his company's intentions toward the hospice property. Words like ethics and conflict of interest filled the room. Cole's answers were precise, measured, but he could feel the weight of suspicion. To his shareholders, numbers mattered most. They demanded growth, expansion, higher returns. Why delay? One investor wrote in a sharp message. Why let sentiment slow progress? Cole read the emails late at night, alone in his glass-walled office. He closed his eyes, remembering the way Grace had steadied an old man's hand at the fundraiser, the way she guarded Eve Harper's secrets with unyielding quiet. He wanted to defend her, to clear her name, yet he knew that speaking too much might draw more light onto her, light that burned instead of warmed. Grace chose silence as well. Reporters called, voices sharp, questions pointed. Was she romantically involved with Harrington? Did she influence donations? Did she misuse her position? She declined every interview. She told herself the hospice's confidentiality mattered more than her own defense. To reveal what she knew about Eve would betray trust. And so, she bore the weight alone. The city itself seemed divided. Letters appeared in newspapers. Some praised the hospice. calling it a refuge that must be protected. Others argued progress could not be halted for sentiment, that the harbor project meant jobs, growth, opportunity. Grace read both sides, her stomach twisting. The place she loved had become a battlefield of words. One evening, her phone buzzed with a forwarded email. She opened it hesitantly. The subject line froze her blood. Harrington Maritime exercising option to purchase hospice property. The message was a draft, leaked from someone inside city channels. It confirmed what she feared most. Harrington held the power, and according to the text, they were preparing to use it. Grace carried her notebook to the seawall that night. The ocean wind whipped strands of hair across her face. Waves struck stone, breaking into spray. She pressed her pen against the page, but found no words. She thought of Cole's steady eyes, of the way he had asked before kissing her, of the mornings with coffee and quiet laughter. Could that same man also be the one dismantling the ground beneath her hospice? Her chest ached with the question. She had trusted him with glances, with silences, with pieces of herself she rarely offered. Now she wondered if trust had been nothing but a fragile glass, already showing cracks. The tide rose, hissing against the rocks. Grace closed the notebook, holding it against her chest as if it could keep her heart steady. She looked out over the dark water, whispering into the salt air. Have I believed in the wrong man? The sea gave no answer. Only the wind carried her words away, scattering them like shards of glass across the night. People fear the truth, not because it is bad, but because it forces a choice. Grace Ellison felt the weight of that choice as she stepped into the softly lit ballroom. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fading floral arrangements from the fundraiser. Music hummed from a distant corner, muted by the space between tables. She could feel every eye, every whisper, even those she could not see. Cole Harrington stood near the back, his posture calm but deliberate. Grace approached, careful, keeping her hands folded. The envelope she had tucked into her bag felt heavy against her side. The gift she had accepted earlier, now a reminder of boundaries she could not cross. Grace, Cole began, his voice low. There's something I need to explain. She hesitated, her heart beat faster, a combination of fear and anticipation. She had suspected, worried, doubted, but hearing it directly made the world tilt in a way she was not prepared for. Cole took a slow breath. I am the anonymous benefactor. I've also retained the option to purchase the hospice property. Grace froze. The words hung in the air, brittle as glass. She had suspected involvement, yes, but hearing it spelled out, here, beneath the soft glow of chandeliers, made it impossible to ignore. She looked at him, trying to read his eyes, searching for intent, for justification, for the man she had thought she knew. He continued, carefully choosing words. I did not reveal this to you because I did not want to influence your judgment. I wanted your assessment to be honest, based solely on what you believed was best for the hospice. Grace felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief that his intentions were, perhaps, not malicious, betrayal that such a secret had been held so long, fear that the very man she had begun to trust was entwined with forces threatening her patient's home. She nodded slowly, handing back the small gift he had given her, her movements deliberate. A plate of dessert sat on a nearby table, untouched, its crumbs scattered. She did not want to touch it. She wanted distance. I have to be clear, she said, her voice steady, though her hands shook slightly. My priority is the patients, not the donor, not even you. Cole inclined his head, accepting her words without argument. He understood the weight of her integrity, as she did his, yet the space between them felt vast now, filled with unspoken regrets and questions. The room seemed to hold its breath. Staff and volunteers moved about, oblivious to the private revelation, while Grace felt as if the chandeliers themselves bore witness to every crack forming between them. She reminded herself professionalism first, clarity above emotion, distance above desire. Her phone buzzed sharply against the polished wooden floor. She glanced at the screen. Eve Harper, critical condition. Immediate family requested. Grace's chest tightened, the tension of the evening's revelation crashing against her sense of duty. She tucked the envelope back into her bag, paused, then moved toward the exit. Each step felt measured, careful, as if she could control the pace of events by walking slowly. Outside, the night air hit her in waves. The soft scent of rain from earlier clung faintly to the brick. She drew in a deep breath, steadying herself. The world beyond the hotel felt both distant and urgent. She needed to be at the hospice, needed to see Eve Harper, needed to process the confession that had upended her trust in Cole Harrington. In the quiet between breaths, Grace reflected on her principles. She could not allow admiration or suspicion to guide her actions. She had chosen this life to protect the vulnerable, to be a steady hand when uncertainty threatened to overturn lives. Tonight was no different. She walked faster now, her heels clicking against the pavement, mind racing but focused. 1,000 questions tugged at her about Cole, about trust, about the future of the hospice, but the first priority was clear. Eve needed her, and nothing else could matter. The distant glow of street lamps reflected off the wet pavement. Grace's thoughts were a tangle of worry and resolve, anticipation and doubt. And in that tangle, she carried a single guiding principle: do what is right, even when the truth hurts. Some secrets exist not to hide from others, but to allow them a final measure of dignity. Grace Ellison understood this when the truth behind Eve Harper finally emerged. In a quiet office at the hospice, she held the file close, careful not to disturb its contents. The patient who had relied on her guidance, the one she had helped craft a letter of reconciliation, was no ordinary stranger. Eve Harper was Evelyn Harrington Cole's mother, using a pseudonym to avoid public attention and media intrusion. Grace's chest tightened as she realized the weight of the knowledge. No one else in the hospice knew. She had guarded the secret meticulously, respecting both the law and the patient's wishes. Every conversation, every note, every careful fold of paper had been executed with deliberate restraint. Cole, meanwhile, had discovered the truth in a conversation that had begun innocently enough. He had asked Grace about the letter, not knowing the full context. When he recognized his mother's handwriting, the folded envelope, the careful phrasing of the reconciliation note, his breath caught. His eyes widened in disbelief. He had not expected this. The implication struck him like a sudden storm. The realization carried a quiet tremor. The person he had worried about, the hospice under threat, the ethical dilemmas, all converged on Grace's steady hands. She had not only protected the patient, she had enabled a truth he had feared might never surface. Yet the moment of clarity was immediately clouded. In the corner of the hospital, in a dimly lit office that smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the real antagonist had been working in silence. The PR director, trusted by Cole's company, had been manipulating information. Every press release, every anonymous tip, every carefully cropped photograph had been crafted to accelerate decisions in the harbor redevelopment. Cole felt a surge of frustration, mingled with relief. He realized that not only had he underestimated the delicate balance Grace maintained, he had also been misled by someone within his own ranks. The stakes were higher than he imagined. He could either act for maximum profit or honor the family and community legacy that his mother had fought to preserve. Grace watched him closely, her expression neutral. She had learned to read him, to see the subtle flickers of emotion that escaped even the most controlled demeanor. She noted the tight set of his jaw, the brief clench of his fingers around the folder he carried. His mind was turning, evaluating, weighing the lives affected by each possible choice. Minutes passed. The hum of the hospital ventilation became background music to the quiet intensity in the room. Cole's hand rose, hesitated, then placed the folder down. He looked at Grace directly. "I will make this right," he said softly, almost to himself. "The property, the funds, they belong to the community. The hospice stays." Grace allowed herself a brief exhale. The decision rippled through the room, quiet but definitive. She observed his gaze soften, a fleeting smile that hinted at relief, responsibility, and recognition of her steadfast integrity. The PR director, realizing the shift in authority and decision-making, slumped back, muttering about lost opportunities and miscalculations. But Cole had already chosen public announcement, full transparency, and the reversal of any plans that might have endangered the hospice. Grace returned to her office, her hands lightly resting on the envelope with Evelyn's letter still inside. It remained untouched for now, the patient's dignity preserved, the reconciliation intact. Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, golden light painting the walls with warmth that belied the tension of the day. News outlets exploded the following morning. Headlines proclaimed the community's victory, the billionaire's choice for family over profit. Yet Grace felt no triumph, only quiet satisfaction. She had maintained the line between professionalism and personal involvement, between secrecy and disclosure, and she had honored the trust placed in her. The hospice staff gathered, cautious smiles crossing their faces. Volunteers whispered, patients nodded, and in the midst of it, Grace stood steady. She had been a witness, a keeper, and a guide. Cole approached later, his presence calm, deliberate. There was no need for explanation now. His actions spoke for themselves. Grace met his gaze briefly, acknowledgement passing silently. They understood each other's boundaries without words. The veil of the alias had lifted, revealing truth, integrity, and the fragile beauty of trust upheld. Grace placed the envelope back in the locked drawer, its secrecy still protected, its purpose honored. The community would thrive, the hospice would remain, and the lessons of patience, discretion, and courage would linger in the quiet corners of their lives. After speaking the right truth, one must live with its cost. Grace Ellison understood this as she returned to the hospice office the morning the board restored her position. The email had been brief but clear. Welcome back as program manager. Your dedication and integrity are recognized. She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. The stress of suspension, the whispers, the uncertainty they had passed, leaving a quiet relief in their wake. She checked the folders on her desk, organizing schedules, confirming volunteer shifts, ensuring every detail was ready for the day. Small routines grounded her, each one a tether to a world she could control. Across town, Cole Harrington faced the consequences of his choice. Shareholders were vocal, insisting on maximum returns, criticizing the decision to cancel the property purchase. He read each email with patience, acknowledging their concerns without retreating. The financial cost was substantial, but the moral cost of ignoring his mother and the community was far greater. He visited Evelyn Harrington later that afternoon. The woman, once anxious about the scrutiny, now sat quietly by the window in her room at the hospice. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, painting her face with soft warmth. Cole approached, taking her hand gently. She smiled, a mixture of pride and relief. "Thank you for trusting me," Cole said, his voice low, "and for letting me see what matters most." Evelyn's eyes softened. "You've chosen the right path, and you've shown me that grace can be practical as well as kind." Cole left her room after a long pause, carrying the sense of closure and responsibility. He walked through the halls of the hospice, observing nurses arranging flowers in patient rooms, volunteers quietly assisting visitors, and Grace moving with her characteristic focus. Every gesture reminded him why the choice had been necessary, why patience and care outweighed immediate gain. Later, he approached Grace, stopping just outside her office. She looked up from her clipboard, catching his gaze. There was no need for words immediately. A simple nod, a brief smile, carried understanding between them. "I want to build the future," Cole said finally, his tone deliberate, "but on respect, responsibility, and trust. That includes you." Grace's chest tightened. She appreciated the clarity, the promise, yet the history of tension made her cautious. She acknowledged his words with a quiet nod, noting that the first step was simply trust restored, not immediate surrender to emotion. The day passed with calm energy. Patients and staff sensed a shift in the hospice atmosphere. Volunteers whispered congratulations. Families noticed the steady presence of leadership restored. The community, which had split under rumors and uncertainty, began to show visible support. Banners appeared outside, small gestures of solidarity lining the walkways, reassuring everyone that the hospice would continue its work uninterrupted. That evening, Grace reviewed her notebook. Noting each task completed, she added one final line: "Stay mindful of trust. Keep boundaries clear." Her hand lingered over the page. The lessons of the past weeks were imprinted deeply. Trust could be fragile, yet it could also be rebuilt, carefully and deliberately. Before leaving, she paused at the main entrance, looking out toward the harbor. The water shimmered in the sunset, waves reflecting hues of gold and rose. A small boat bobbed gently, tied to a weathered dock. She thought of tomorrow, of the quiet morning they had planned at the docks, a chance to start anew. Cole approached, holding 2 cups of coffee this time, a smile on his face, not rushed, not commanding, only present. He offered 1 cup to her. Grace accepted, letting warmth seep into her hands. "Tomorrow," he said softly. "A proper beginning, no surprises, just the day, the harbor, and coffee." She smiled faintly, acknowledging the promise, and the two of them walked along the edge of the harbor for a few steps, listening to the gentle lap of water against the pier. In the distance, gulls circled lazily, and the city lights flickered on. Grace felt a small thrill of hope, quiet, steady, and earned. The storm of past weeks had left marks, cracks like the ones in glass, but the foundations of trust, care, and shared purpose were beginning to feel whole again. She carried that sense forward into the night, the quiet hum of the city, a reminder that life, even after turmoil, could be steady, purposeful, and warm. True happiness is not loud. It steps lightly on old wooden floors and rests in hands trembling with gratitude. Grace Ellison felt that, as she entered the small brick chapel for her wedding, the scent of polished wood and candle wax mingled in the air. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting gentle patterns across the worn pews. Her mother sat near the front, smiling softly. The years of worry, of sleepless nights, of standing beside her daughter through challenges, were reflected in her eyes. Across the aisle, Cole Harrington waited, calm yet full of anticipation, his hand brushing against the folds of his suit. Evelyn Harrington's presence was remembered in quiet whispers of gratitude, in flowers placed near the altar, and in the calm dignity that enveloped the room. The ceremony was intimate. There were no grand gestures, no elaborate speeches, just promises exchanged quietly, meaning etched into every word. Grace could feel the weight of everything they had endured, years of doubt, fear, and restraint, and it all funneled into the simplicity of this moment. After the vows, they stepped outside to the warm southern afternoon. The air carried the faint scent of salt from the nearby harbor, mingling with jasmine from the courtyard. Cole took Grace's hand, and they walked slowly along the brick path leading to a small bench under a moss-draped oak. The bench overlooked the water, calm and shimmering in the late sun. In that quiet space, they shared the simple pleasures of married life. A picnic prepared in haste sandwiches, a pecan tart, iced tea in glass tumblers. Their conversation drifted between shared memories, dreams, and the gentle banter of familiarity. The world beyond the chapel seemed distant, irrelevant. Cole had established Evelyn House, an expanded care facility honoring his mother's dedication. Grace would lead programs connecting families, ensuring every patient and loved one felt the same dignity she had fought to preserve. Walking through the halls earlier that morning, she had seen rooms prepared with quiet elegance, spaces for conversation, reflection, and healing. Each detail had been chosen with care, and she felt pride tempered with humility. Evening approached. They returned to the pier, where the tide lapped softly against weathered pilings. The sky was painted with shades of rose and lavender. A small boat rocked gently near the dock. Grace rested her hand on the rail, letting the breeze catch her hair. She thought of the first time she had walked along this harbor, rain dripping, heart pounding, uncertain of what tomorrow might bring. That memory lingered, a motif of beginnings and courage. Cole stood beside her, his hand finding hers without words. The memory of his question, his gentle request for a kiss, came back to her. That moment had been the threshold of everything that followed, the door to a life neither had dared imagine alone. Dinner on the house porch was simple, yet perfect. Plates clinked softly, laughter mingled with the sound of the water, and conversation flowed with ease. Grace caught herself smiling often, savoring the way life's complexities had unraveled into this quiet simplicity. They walked along the water again in the fading light, talking softly, pausing to watch gulls circle, the reflection of the sun rippling across the harbor. Cole spoke of plans for the community, the hospice programs, and dreams that extended beyond profit. Grace listened, reflecting on her journey, on the patience and resilience it had demanded. As darkness fell, lanterns flickered along the pier. Grace and Cole paused, hands intertwined, hearts steady with the certainty of shared purpose. The challenges of the past, the whispers, the doubts, the threats felt distant. The present offered clarity, connection, and the quiet thrill of a life aligned with intention. In her mind, Grace replayed the moments of trust, of careful discretion, of courageous choices. Each memory reinforced her commitment to the work, to the community, and to the partnership she now shared with Cole. Beneath the mossy oak, overlooking the calm harbor waters, they had found both love and purpose. Tomorrow promised the opening of Evelyn House. Grace closed her eyes briefly, imagining families arriving, patients finding comfort, and the gentle laughter of volunteers and children filling the hallways. She held Cole's hand tighter, drawing strength from both the past and the hope of what lay ahead. People call it a miracle, but in truth, it is the result of small acts of kindness repeated over time. A year had passed. The harbor glimmered in the late afternoon sun. Grace Ellison walked among familiar faces at the outdoor fundraiser. Wooden benches lined the cobblestone path, each one engraved with words of gratitude in honor of dignity, compassion, and care. She paused at one, tracing the letters lightly with her finger. Volunteers mingled, setting tables, arranging flowers, and preparing refreshments. Children ran past, their laughter mixing with the sound of water lapping against the pier. Grace carried a basket of programs, distributing them quietly. Each step was measured, deliberate, yet she moved with a natural ease that came from knowing this work mattered. Cole Harrington joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. They shared a small smile, a private acknowledgement of the distance they had crossed together. The city around them buzzed softly, but they moved in a rhythm that felt separate, intentional. Members of the community began telling their stories. One family recounted how a hospice volunteer had comforted their father during the final days of illness. Another described how the new Evelyn House had allowed siblings to sit together, holding hands, sharing memories, and finding peace. Each account made Grace's chest tighten, a mixture of pride, humility, and awe. Cole listened as well, leaning in occasionally to offer a quiet comment, nodding with genuine interest. His presence was steady, unassuming, a reminder that his choices in the past year had extended far beyond profit. He had embraced responsibility, witnessing firsthand how deliberate care and integrity could ripple outward. Grace looked over at the harbor. The sun cast golden streaks across the water. She remembered the first moments she had arrived here months ago, uncertain, cautious, burdened with fears for the hospice and her mother. She thought of rain-soaked mornings, letters held carefully in her hands, the quiet courage it had taken to act ethically when the world watched and judged. A volunteer approached, holding a stack of envelopes for donors. Grace thanked her and placed each envelope in the appropriate slot. She noticed a small hand reach out from a young child, tugging gently at her sleeve. She knelt, smiling, asking the child about his favorite animal. The conversation was simple, mundane, yet it felt profound reminders of why she persisted, why she had tolerated sleepless nights and anxious days. Cole's voice came softly beside her. "Do you ever think about the moment it all began?" That question in the hallway. The first time we truly connected, Grace smiled faintly, a memory surfacing. "I do," she admitted. "It feels like yesterday. And like a lifetime ago. So many small choices have led here." He nodded. "It's true. Love, trust, patience, all of it requires courage. And it grows stronger when we act from kindness rather than obligation." They walked slowly along the pier, the breeze carrying the scent of salt water and jasmine. Grace's gaze followed a boat bobbing near the dock, its reflection shimmering in the sun. She thought about the families, the patience, the moments of care that had shaped the past year, the smallest decisions the right word, a gentle touch, a promise kept, had built something enduring. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the wooden planks. Grace paused, holding Cole's hand. The warmth reminded her of that first kiss, tentative and respectful, a threshold to a life she could not have imagined alone. It reminded her of patience, courage, and the quiet persistence of goodness. Around them, the community continued to celebrate quietly. Stories of healing, of comfort, of generosity flowed from table to table. Grace and Cole listened, letting the words sink in. They were witnesses, but also participants in the legacy they had helped cultivate. The final rays of sun touched the water, sparkling like tiny flecks of light. Grace inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for a moment. The harbor was calm, reflecting both sky and city. She realized that the most precious things, the dignity of others, the courage to act ethically, the love shared in quiet moments could not be purchased. They could only be chosen, day after day, in small, deliberate acts. Cole squeezed her hand gently. "What do you see in the future?" he asked. Grace opened her eyes, looking at the horizon. More mornings like this, more acts of kindness, more beginnings that matter. They stood together, listening to the water, the laughter, the soft murmur of gratitude, feeling the resonance of choices made wisely. The echo of a single question, a careful act, a shared moment, had traveled far, shaping lives and hearts alike. And as the last light faded over the harbor, Grace knew the journey was only beginning. Each day offered another chance for courage, another opportunity for tenderness, another moment to choose what mattered most. This story reminds us that true courage and fulfillment come not from wealth or recognition, but from integrity, compassion, and the choices we make every day. Grace Ellison shows us that even when life is heavy with responsibilities for family, work, and community, we can act with patience, kindness, and moral clarity, protecting those who depend on us, honoring trust, and maintaining dignity can ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. Cole Harrington's journey teaches that power alone is meaningless without empathy. Real strength lies in listening, understanding, and making decisions that balance personal ambition with the well-being of others. Even the smallest act, a careful word, a quiet gesture, a promise kept can transform a life, a family, or a community. For those in the later stages of life, the story reinforces the enduring value of relationships, the courage to act rightly, and the peace that comes from choosing love, honesty, and service over selfish gain. Life's richest rewards are not measured in dollars, titles, or accolades. They are measured in trust, connection, and the quiet moments when we choose kindness over convenience. Ultimately, the tale invites reflection. Every decision, no matter how small, shapes the legacy we leave for others. True wealth is found in heart, integrity, and the courage to care. Thank you so much for joining us on Grace and Cole's journey. Your time and attention mean the world. If this story touched your heart, please give us a like, share it with someone who loves heartfelt tales, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another inspiring story. Your support helps us continue bringing stories of love, courage, and hope to life.